Hey everyone, today's screencast is on pest management. If we were to define a pest, it would be any species that I suppose competes with human welfare, right? Whether that devours our crops, spreads disease, destroys buildings, or destroys and simplifies ecosystems. It's sort of interesting when we think about managing pests. It's a relatively new phenomenon. In terms of a natural ecosystem, for example, pests are rarely an issue. A natural forest ecosystem, for example, has a variety of habitats, a variety of ecological niches. It's a very competitive environment, and that competition means there's a lot of population controls, right? A lot of predators, parasites, and disease that keeps the other populations in check, and therefore one particular species doesn't really come to dominate the entire ecosystem. All of that changes, however, when humans start to simplify and convert these diverse ecosystems into homogeneous, simplified, monocropped plantations. You start to lose the biodiversity, you start to lose those natural population checks. For example, there's over 30,000 species of spiders that are super effective at keeping other populations under control. But when you start to simplify those ecosystems, those predators are also reduced and pest populations grow in number. So as a way to combat that, what humans have done is develop a series of chemicals, and those chemicals are often utilized to keep pest populations at control. And here's a bunch of images of the use of DDT, which is a known insecticide that we'll take a look at in just a little bit. Anyway, so what are pesticides? They are chemicals designed to inhibit the growth and keep populations of pests in check. Pesticide is sort of a generic term. We have a variety of different types: insecticides designed to kill insects, herbicides designed to kill unwanted plants, fungicides killing fungus, and rodenticides killing rodents. Of course, you also have homicide, which kills people. Just kidding about that. Well, I guess. Anyways, I do want to look at one particular insecticide today. It is DDT. DDT was synthesized in a lab from the petroleum industry. So it is a chlorinated hydrocarbon, and it was created in 1939. And before we look at some of the ecological impacts and impacts to human health, we should certainly sing its praise for a little bit. This insecticide is incredibly cheap and effective. It's effective in part because it's persistent, so its shelf life in the environment is up to 15 years. It acts very quickly and effectively at preventing crop-devouring insects from overwhelming agricultural sectors, and that reduces a farmer's crop loss and keeps their revenues high. Furthermore, it's been argued that DDT has saved a lot of lives. Malaria, for example, is thought to kill about 1 to 2 million people annually. And since we've used DDT, some experts suggest that it has saved up to maybe 500 million people. That's pretty significant. And the way it does that is by controlling mosquito populations. Now, mosquitoes don't cause malaria. Malaria is rather caused by a Plasmodium parasite. This parasite gets into our blood supply and in our liver, where it destroys red blood cells. This leads to intense fevers and chills and vomiting, and ultimately makes the victim more susceptible to other diseases. So the reason they're trying to control the mosquitoes is because the mosquitoes are the agents of transport of this disease. They are what we call vectors. So certain species, of which there are 60 different species, the female actually withdraws blood from a victim, including with it the Plasmodium parasite. The mosquito will then bite another person and inject that Plasmodium parasite into another host. And in this way, it moves through a population. And so because of this, many argue DDT is a very good thing because it has saved millions of lives. Some of this started to unravel, however, and people started to understand that there are some larger impacts at play. And in particular, Rachel Carson, a renowned scientist, in 1962 published one of the most important books of our time titled Silent Spring. She was a hard-nosed scientist. She knew what she was doing, really detailed, and really convincing. She could build an argument by collecting an enormous amount of data and convince people of its importance. And that's exactly what she did by publishing Silent Spring in 1962. So why did she call it Silent Spring? Her friend called her up. Back in the day, these big trucks used to drive up and down suburban streets with these big tankers on their back, and they would spray DDT down these tree-lined streets to control mosquito populations. What her friend noticed when walking in a bird sanctuary adjacent to her neighborhood after a spraying is that she found hundreds and hundreds of songbirds littered on the ground, dead. And she thought that potentially this chemical was doing it. She reached out to her friend Rachel, who's decided to start to investigate this. And what she discovered was pretty scary. And so she actually devoted the rest of her career to exposing the ecological and human health consequences of using various pesticides, especially DDT, which was eventually banned in the United States in 1972. So in her book, her thesis sort of followed the following arguments. Rachel's first argument is the fact that she described DDT as not as an insecticide, but as a biocide. In other words, it just doesn't kill the target pest. It doesn't stop there. It's considered a broad spectrum pesticide. So while it kills the desired mosquito, it also kills other insects and other species. And ultimately, you could be killing species that you don't want dead. You could be killing predator species that are going to keep other pest populations in check. And so what you notice by using more and more of these broad spectrum pesticides, the pest populations of other species start to increase. In fact, of our 300 major pest populations that we have today, 100 of them were never pests until we started to use pesticides. And they became pests because ultimately a lot of the predator populations started to dwindle and pest populations started to explode. Rachel's second argument was described as the pesticide treadmill. She also noted that certain insects and certain populations eventually developed a genetic resistance to the spraying of pesticides. In other words, a pest population may have had a few individuals that were genetically predisposed to not succumbing to the effects of the pesticide. They had a genetic resistance to it. So this positive adaptive trait through natural selection ultimately led to differential reproduction, and in a few short years, because they are strategists, the entire population was resistant. She referred to it as a treadmill because the farmers are now spending more and more money using more and more pesticides at higher and higher concentrations with limited results. Rachel's third argument is biomagnification. We learned about this in our last screencast, but yes, DDT is a chlorinated hydrocarbon. That means it's persistent, it's mobile, and it's fat soluble. All three of those characteristics allow it to be accumulated within an organism and then magnified through the food chain. Because of this, tertiary level consumers are most affected. And in fact, the first species ever placed on the endangered species list was the peregrine falcon. The peregrine falcon populations were declining because this chlorinated hydrocarbon, DDT, was actually thinning out their eggshells. These thinned out eggshells ultimately meant their reproductive viability diminished and their populations decreased. Furthermore, it's also been noted that DDT is an endocrine disruptor, a gender bender, and it's been noted in several lakes in Florida where DDT was used, alligators and their penis size were shrunken by about half of their original size, reducing their reproductive viability. So lots of interesting ecological impacts. All right, so what are the solutions to widespread use of pesticides? One common solution that's starting to be implemented more and more is what we call integrated pest management, also referred to as IPM. This is an ecological approach to managing our pest populations. Ecological in that we're going to use physical or mechanical mechanisms, biological controls, and chemical controls in an effort to reduce pest populations. We're not trying to eradicate the pest, rather, we're just trying to bring their numbers down to economically tolerable levels of crop loss, for example. So let's go through all three of these prongs of attack. The first is mechanical controls. So you can burn a field if you know you have a large infestation. You can mechanically capture the insects with traps. You can rotate your crops and plant them so that their harvest time and their plant times don't coincide with when the pests are out. All of these would be mechanical or physical controls of pests. Biological controls. All right, can we introduce predators? Natural predators that have proven effective at controlling pests. Yes, we certainly know there are some colossal failures associated with biocontrol. We only have to think of the cane toad, but there have been many exciting examples of various insects that have been used to control pest populations. They've also are developing ways to isolate pheromones. This is sort of like the Axe effect, so to speak, right? These are chemical cues or smells of sex attractants that can be used to lure the pests into traps or to lure predators into the field to then consume the pest populations. We've also been experimenting with genetic modification. Genetically modified foods are somewhat controversial, but in the case of BT corn, they've isolated various genes that they've spliced and inserted into corn. We call this BT corn, and the corn now produces its own pesticide, and that sort of keeps caterpillars from consuming the actual corn and decreasing crop loss. So lots of interesting benefits associated with that, and we'll look more in detail at genetic modifications later in this unit. Finally, last but not least, and well, perhaps as a triage, as a final solution would be to use some chemical treatment, right? So can we find certain chemicals that perhaps are less persistent in the environment? Organophosphates, for example, although they're a fairly toxic pesticide, they break down rapidly. So they do the trick, they kill the pests, and then they break down and therefore prevent these chemicals from biologically accumulating and magnifying in food webs. Also, chemical treatments can be way more targeted than just widespread spraying, but rather more targeted mechanisms using these types of sprayers or individual sprays to reduce the runoff and prevent these chemicals from getting into aquatic systems. Finally, although we have an IPM strategy that farmers can utilize, it's also pretty important for us to be able to protect ourselves, right? And so we can make sure we are buying fruits and vegetables that are safe in that they are not going to be coated in various pesticides. One way to ensure that your fruits and vegetables are not coated in pesticides is to buy them organically. So organic implies, in this case, that these crops are not grown with pesticides. Now, that can be rather expensive. We've all gone into Wegmans before, and yes, some of them are more expensive than others. So here's a list, right? Some fruits and vegetables are just a little bit more dirty in terms of their ability to absorb and accumulate these pesticides than others. especially those ones that don't have a thick outer protective covering. So if you want to take a look here, here's the top 12. We call them the dirty dozen that you should always consider perhaps buying organically, so you can take those necessary safeguards and protect your health so you're not consuming pesticides. All right, guys, that's it for today, and I hope all is well.